The merciless sun beat down on the Texas panhandle, turning the endless prairie into a shimmering ocean of heat. Red dust swirled in lazy devils across the trail, and the only sound for miles was the whisper of wind through the sparse mesquite brush. Jacob Callahan squinted against the glare, his weathered Stetson pulled low over steel-gray eyes that had seen too much of life's harsh edges. At 32, Jacob owned more land than most men could ride across in a day. The Double C Ranch sprawled across thousands of acres of prime grazing land, its cattle bearing his brand from here to the Rio Grande. But wealth hadn't softened him. If anything, it had made him harder, more cautious of those who might covet what he'd built with blood and sweat. He'd been checking the northern boundary when something caught his eye, a dark shape against the pale trail, too still to be natural. Jacob touched his spurs to his horse's flanks, and the big sorrel gelding picked up its pace, hooves raising small clouds of dust with each step. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into two forms, a horse, fallen on its side, ribs heaving with labored breath, and beside it, a figure in blue calico sprawled motionless on the hard-packed earth. Whoa. Rex. Jacob dismounted in one smooth motion, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt .45 at his hip. Years of frontier living had taught him that helplessness could be a trap, and kindness could get a man killed. But as he approached, caution gave way to concern. The figure was a young woman. Her dark hair tumbled loose from what had once been a neat bun, her face pale beneath the dust and sun. Her dress, though torn and dirty, spoke of Eastern sensibilities, store-bought fabric, machine-sewn seams. Not a frontier woman. Then Jacob knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, and when he touched her wrist, he found a pulse weak but steady. No visible wounds, no blood, just exhaustion, dehydration, and exposure. The horse whinnied pitifully. Trying to lift its head, Jacob saw the problem immediately, a deep gash along its foreleg, already attracting flies. The poor beast had run itself nearly to death. Easy there, he murmured. Though he knew the animal was beyond saving, he'd tend to that mercy later. First, the girl. She stirred when he lifted her, her eyelids fluttering, green eyes, bright as spring grass, focused on him with effort. "Please," the word came out as barely a whisper. "Please, help." "Save your strength," Jacob said gruffly, already moving toward Rex with her slight weight in his arms. She weighed no more than a sack of grain, all bones and determination. My family," she managed, her fingers clutching weakly at his shirt. "Where's your wagon, your people?" Her eyes filled with tears that cut tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Gone. Indians. No, not Indians. Bandits dressed like... They killed..." She shuddered and went limp again. Jacob's jaw tightened. Bandits, masquerading as Indians, a common enough trick to throw off pursuit and inflame tensions. He'd heard rumors of a gang working the wagon routes, but they'd never struck this close to his territory before. He settled the girl across his saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm holding her secure against his chest. Rex could carry them both the 10 miles to his line cabin in the hills. The main ranch house was twice that distance, and she needed water and shelter now. As they rode, Jacob found himself studying his unexpected burden. Young, maybe 20, 21 at most. Her hands were soft, uncalloused, with neat, trimmed nails that spoke of a genteel upbringing. What was a girl like this doing on the frontier heading west with family? She'd said settlers, probably, lured by promises of free land and fresh starts. The girl moaned softly, her head lolling against his shoulder, despite himself. Jacob felt a flicker of something he'd thought long-dead protectiveness that went beyond mere human decency. He'd closed that part of himself off 3 years ago, the day he'd laid Margaret in the ground along with their stillborn son. Love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not anymore. The line cabin came into view just as the sun touched the western hills. A small but sturdy structure of logs and mud chinking. Jacob had built it himself in the early days. Before the ranch house, before Margaret, when all he'd had was ambition and a deed to land nobody else wanted. He dismounted carefully, keeping the girl steady, and carried her inside. The cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table and 2 chairs, shelves stocked with canned goods and medical supplies. Everything a man needed to survive on the edge of civilization. Jacob laid her on the bed and fetched water from the barrel by the door. She drank greedily when he held the cup to her lips, then coughed and sputtered. "Slowly," he cautioned. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Her eyes found his again, more focused now. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought I would die out there." "What's your name?" Evelyn Rose." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "My parents, I have to find them. They might have survived." Jacob didn't sugarcoat the truth. "How long ago was the attack?" 2 days, maybe 3. I've been walking. The horse found me this morning. Let me ride." 3 days. In this heat, without water, anyone left wounded would be long dead. Jacob had seen enough frontier tragedies to know the harsh arithmetic of survival. "We'll talk about it when you're stronger," he said. "Right now, you need rest and food." But Evelyn shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "You don't understand. They're all I have. My father, mother, my little brother, James." "We were going to California, to my uncle's orange groves. It was supposed to be paradise." Paradise. Jacob almost laughed at the bitter irony. How many had come west chasing that same dream, only to find death waiting on the trail? He busied himself building a fire, giving her privacy for her grief. When the flames were crackling, he heated water and mixed it with cornmeal, adding a precious bit of salt pork for flavor. Simple fare, but nourishing. "Eat," he commanded, helping her sit up against the wall. She took the bowl with trembling hands. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." "Basic human decency." Jacob replied curtly, "Eat." But as she struggled with the spoon, he found himself steadying her hands, patient despite his gruff manner. When she'd managed half the bowl, exhaustion overtook her again. "I need to go back," she murmured as sleep pulled her under. "Have to bury them proper. Can't leave them for the buzzards." Jacob said nothing. Come morning, he'd ride out and see what was left of her wagon train, but he already knew what he'd find. The frontier collected its toll in bodies and broken dreams, and this girl's family had paid the price. He pulled a blanket over her and stepped outside to tend to Rex and put the injured horse out of its misery. The shot echoed across the empty land, a punctuation mark on another frontier tragedy. When he returned, Evelyn was whimpering in her sleep, caught in nightmares. Without thinking, Jacob sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the hair back from her forehead, the gesture achingly familiar. Margaret had suffered nightmares too, visions of eastern cities and society balls, of all she'd given up to follow him west. "Shh," he murmured. "You're safe now." Safe. The word tasted like a lie. Nobody was safe out here, not really. The land was too big, too wild, too hungry. It devoured the weak and tested the strong until they broke or became part of it, as hard and unforgiving as the landscape itself. But for tonight, in his cabin with thick walls and a loaded rifle, she was as safe as anyone could be in the territories. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, questions about who she was, what to do with her, how to keep her presence from bringing trouble to his door. Jacob settled into the chair by the fire, rifle across his knees, and prepared for a long night's vigil. He didn't trust easily, and this girl's arrival felt too convenient, too orchestrated. Maybe she was exactly what she seemed, a survivor of a brutal attack, alone and desperate. Or maybe she was bait, part of some elaborate scheme to get at his wealth. Time would tell. It always did. as the fire burned low and coyotes sang their lonesome songs in the distance. Jacob found his eyes drawn to the sleeping figure on his bed, in the flickering light. She looked younger, more vulnerable. Her breathing had steadied, the lines of pain smoothing from her face. Against his better judgment, against every wall he'd built around his heart, Jacob felt something shift inside him. Not attraction, not yet, but a recognition, perhaps, of a fellow soul marked by loss, adrift in a land that cared nothing for human suffering. "Evelyn Rose," he said quietly to the darkness. "What am I supposed to do with you?" The frontier gave no answer, only the endless whisper of wind and the distant howl of predators in the night. Come morning, decisions would have to be made. But for now, Jacob Callahan kept watch over the stranger who'd stumbled into his life, and wondered if fate was offering him a second chance or setting a trap that would destroy everything he'd built from the ashes of his grief. Dawn broke gray and uncertain over the hills, painting the cabin in shades of ash and shadow. Jacob stirred from his position by the dying fire, his back protesting the night spent in the hard chair. His first instinct was to check on his unexpected guest. Evelyn was awake, watching him with those striking green eyes that seemed too bright for the dim light. She'd pulled herself upright against the wall, the blanket clutched to her chest like armor. "Morning," Jacob said gruffly, stretching the kinks from his spine. "How are you feeling?"
"Alive,"
she answered, her voice stronger than the night before.
"Thanks to you."
He busied himself rebuilding the fire, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "There's a stream out back for washing, privy's behind the woodpile. Can you manage?" Color touched her cheeks, the first healthy sign he'd seen.
Yes, thank you."
Jacob helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. She was taller than he'd realized, the top of her head reaching his chin, but still too thin, too fragile for this harsh land. While she tended to her needs, Jacob prepared a proper breakfast biscuits from his stores, reheated beans, and strong coffee. The familiar routine of survival soothed him, gave his hands something to do besides remember the feel of her in his arms. When Evelyn returned, she'd managed to tidy herself somewhat. Her hair was repinned, her face clean, though her dress remained torn and travel-stained. She moved carefully to the table, pride keeping her spine straight despite obvious pain. "Eat," Jacob commanded, setting the plate before her. All of it. This time she didn't argue, tucking into the simple meal with an appetite that pleased him. When she'd cleared her plate, he poured coffee, black and bitter as the land itself. "I need to ask you some questions," he said, taking the chair across from her. "About the attack." Her hands tightened on the tin cup, but she nodded.
"What do you want to know?"
"How many wagons in your party?"
"4 families. The Millers, the Johnsons, us, and an older couple, the Wheelers."
Her voice caught.
23 souls in all."
"What route were you taking?" "The southern trail through Comanche territory. Our guide said—" She stopped, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Oh God, he led us right to them. Didn't he?" Jacob nodded grimly. "Likely paid to do it, these bandits. Describe them." She closed her eyes, remembering. Maybe a dozen men. They wore feathers and paint, but their leader had blue eyes, and they spoke English when they thought we couldn't hear. "Any names mentioned?" "One. They called the leader Sutton. Jake Sutton." Jacob knew the name, knew the man by reputation, a former Confederate soldier turned outlaw who preyed on wagon trains and isolated homesteads.
Clever enough to leave false trails, brutal enough to leave no witnesses.
Usually. Why did they let you live? The question had to be asked, though he could see it hurt her.
"They didn't. I was gathering wood for the evening fire when they struck. I hid in a ravine, covered myself with brush."
Tears tracked down her cheeks. "I could hear the screaming, the gunshots. I wanted to help, but I was too afraid." "You'd be dead if you'd tried. Jacob said bluntly. No shame in surviving.
Isn't there?
She met his eyes, and he saw a depth of guilt that matched his own. I listened to my family die and did nothing. Jacob stood abruptly, the conversation cutting too close to his own memories. I need to ride out, see what's left. You'll stay here.
I'm coming with you.
No. They're my family. She tried to stand, swayed, and gripped the table.
I have the right.
You have the right to get yourself killed. Jacob interrupted. Sutton's men might still be watching. You stay here where it's safe. And if you don't come back... He showed her where he kept the rifle, the ammunition, the extra food supplies. Bar the door. Don't let anyone in unless they give the password Adobe Moon. If I'm not back by nightfall tomorrow, take Rex and ride south to the main ranch. Ask for Tom Martinez, he's my foreman. He'll see you safe to town. Why Adobe Moon? She asked. Jacob paused at the door, remembering something my wife used to say. The moon looked like adobe in the desert light. He left before she could ask more questions. The ride to where she'd described the attack took 3 hours. Jacob smelled it before he saw it, the sweet, sick scent of death under the sun. Buzzards circled overhead, their shadows passing over the devastation below. The wagons had been burned, their iron wheels and chains twisted by the heat. Bodies lay where they'd fallen, already past the point of easy identification. Jacob counted them methodically, his bandana tied over his nose and mouth. 22, 1 short. He searched the surrounding area and found drag marks leading to a cluster of rocks. There, hidden from the main carnage, was another body. A young man, perhaps 16 or 17. James, Evelyn's brother. Something about the scene bothered Jacob. The boy had been shot, yes, but also beaten. His pockets were turned out, and there were rope marks on his wrists. They'd questioned him before killing him. Looking for something, or someone. Jacob's unease grew as he performed the grim task of burial. It took most of the day to dig graves in the hard earth, to give these strangers what dignity he could. He said no words over them. He'd lost faith in prayers when Margaret died, but he marked each grave with stones. By the time he finished, the sun was sinking low. Jacob mounted Rex and turned for home, but his thoughts remained with the scene behind him. Something wasn't right about Evelyn's story. Not that she was lying, her grief was too real, but there were pieces missing. The cabin was dark when he returned. No smoke from the chimney. Jacob's hand went to his gun as he dismounted, moving silently to the door. Adobe Moon, he called softly. He heard the bar being lifted, and then Evelyn opened the door, the rifle clutched in her trembling hands. Thank God, she breathed. I heard wolves, and I thought... Just coyotes, Jacob assured her, gently taking the weapon. They won't come near the cabin. He rebuilt the fire while she peppered him with questions he didn't want to answer. Finally, he told her the truth. They were gone. All of them. And he'd seen they were properly buried. She broke down then, sobbing with a grief that shook her whole body. Without thinking, Jacob pulled her against him, letting her cry into his shirt. She felt small and lost in his arms, and he found himself murmuring nonsense words of comfort, his hand smoothing her hair. I'm alone, she whispered against his chest, completely alone in the world. You're alive, he reminded her. That has to count for something. She pulled back to look at him, her face streaked with tears. Does it? What am I supposed to do now? Where am I supposed to go? Jacob didn't have answers. He knew what the proper thing would be: take her to town. Let the good women of the church find her a position as a seamstress or teacher. But Sutton was still out there, and something about the attack suggested Evelyn might still be in danger. For now, you stay here, he heard himself saying, until you're healed, until we figure out what's next. I can't impose on you. Not imposing. I need to teach you some things first. How to shoot properly, how to read the land, how to survive if Sutton comes looking for survivors. Her eyes widened. You think he will? Maybe. Jacob moved to the window, checking the approaching darkness. Your brother, they questioned him before he died. What would Sutton want from your family?
I don't know. We didn't have much money.
Father was a clockmaker. Mother taught piano. She trailed off, thinking,
Wait, Father had papers.
Something about a mining claim he'd inherited from his brother, but he said it was worthless, already played out. Or maybe not so worthless. Jacob filed the information away. Tomorrow we start your lessons. Tonight, get some rest. Where will you sleep? Same as last night. He indicated the chair.
That's not right. It's your bed.
Discussion's over, Jacob said firmly. Go on now. But later, as the fire burned low and Evelyn's breathing deepened into sleep, she cried out in her dreams. Jacob found himself at her bedside again, this time sitting on the edge as she thrashed against invisible demons.
Shh,
he soothed, catching her flailing hands.
You're safe. I've got you.
Her eyes flew open, unfocused and terrified.
Don't let them find me, she pleaded, not fully awake. Please, I can't.
No one's going to find you, Jacob promised, surprised by the fierce protectiveness in his voice. Not while I'm here. She clutched his hands like a lifeline, and he stayed until she calmed, until sleep claimed her again. Even then, he found it hard to leave, to return to his chair and his vigil. This was dangerous territory, not marked on any map. He'd brought her to his sanctuary, this cabin where he came to escape the memories that haunted the main house. Already she was changing the space, filling it with her presence, her need, her surprising strength beneath the fragility. Jacob stared into the dying embers and saw the shape of trouble ahead, but he also remembered the weight of her in his arms, the trust in her eyes when she'd opened the door to his password, the way she'd tried to be brave with the rifle. Margaret, he whispered to the darkness. What would you have me do? But Margaret was 3 years dead, and the living woman in his bed was a complication he hadn't asked for and didn't want. Come morning, he'd start teaching her what she needed to know to survive. And then, as soon as she was strong enough, he'd send her on her way. That was the plan. Anyway, Jacob had learned, though, that the frontier had a way of changing plans, of taking what you thought you wanted and showing you what you really needed, as if in response to his thoughts. Evelyn murmured in her sleep not a cry of fear this time, but his name, soft and trusting and utterly disarming. Jacob closed his eyes and prepared for another long night, knowing that despite all his walls and weapons, something had already breached his defenses, something with green eyes and a grief that matched his own, something that made his careful, solitary existence suddenly seem as empty as the vast Texas sky. The days fell into a rhythm as unexpected as it was comfortable. Mornings began with strong coffee and simple breakfasts. Jacob teaching Evelyn the basics of frontier cooking, how to stretch supplies, preserve meat, make biscuits that wouldn't break teeth. She proved a quick study, her Eastern education serving her well in unexpected ways. Mathematics helps with rationing, she explained one morning, carefully measuring flour. Mother always said a good household runs on numbers. Jacob watched her work, noting how she'd gained color in her cheeks, how her movements had grown more confident. 2 weeks had passed since he'd found her on the trail, and the scared, half-dead girl was transforming into something else entirely. Time for shooting practice, he announced after breakfast. She'd progressed from flinching at the rifle's weight to holding it steady, from closing her eyes when firing to hitting targets with increasing accuracy. Today, Jacob had set up bottles on a fence rail 50 yards from the cabin. Remember, he coached, standing close enough to correct her stance. Squeeze, don't pull, let the shot surprise you. The rifle cracked, and a bottle exploded. Evelyn's face lit up with pride. Better, Jacob admitted. But in a real situation, you won't have time to aim so careful. Again. They practiced until her shoulder ached, until she could hit 3 bottles in succession. as she lowered the rifle, rubbing her sore shoulder. Jacob felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. Pride in her progress. Yes, but something more. "You're a natural," he said, taking the weapon from her.
I had a good teacher.
Her smile was shy but genuine.
Though I still don't understand why you're taking such trouble with me.
Jacob busied himself cleaning the rifle, avoiding her eyes. "Told you. Can't send you out into the world defenseless."
Is that all?
The question hung between them like morning mist. Jacob wanted to maintain the fiction that she was just a temporary inconvenience, but the truth was becoming harder to ignore. He looked forward to their morning conversations, to her observations about life that made him see familiar things in new ways. He'd even caught himself hurrying through his ranch work to return to the cabin earlier. "Storm coming," he said instead, nodding toward the darkening western sky. "We'd best get inside." The storm struck just after nightfall, rain hammering the roof like bullets. Thunder shook the cabin walls, and lightning turned the windows white. Jacob sat by the fire, working on repairing a bridle, while Evelyn read from one of his few books a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets that had belonged to Margaret. "Did your wife enjoy poetry?" she asked suddenly. Jacob's hand stilled on the leather. "Some. She was educated back east, said it reminded her of civilization."
Do you miss her?
No one had asked him that directly since the funeral. Most folks avoided the subject altogether, as if Margaret's death was contagious. "Every day," he answered honestly. "But it's different now. Less like drowning, more like a scar that aches in bad weather." Evelyn closed the book, studying him in the firelight.
How did she die, if you don't mind my asking?
Childbirth. Doctor said the baby was turned wrong. Nothing he could do for either of them. The words came easier than expected.
She was so excited about being a mother. Picked out names, sewed little clothes. I'm sorry.
It was 3 years ago. Jacob resumed his work, kneading his hands busy. Life goes on.
Does it?
Evelyn's voice was soft.
Or do we just pretend it does?
Before he could answer, thunder crashed directly overhead. The windows lit up brilliant white, and in the aftermath, they heard it the sharp crack of splitting wood. "The barn!" Evelyn gasped, jumping to her feet. But Jacob was already moving, grabbing his coat and hat. "Stay here." "Like hell," she shot back, surprising them both with her language. "You might need help." There was no time to argue. Together they plunged into the storm, rain hitting like ice pellets. Lightning had struck the old oak near the lean-to where Jacob kept his spare horses, and burning branches threatened the structure. "Get the horses out!" Jacob shouted over the storm. "I'll handle the fire." Evelyn didn't hesitate, running for the lean-to while Jacob grabbed buckets. They worked in desperate harmony, she leading terrified horses to safety while he fought the spreading flames. The rain helped, but not enough the old wood of the lean-to had caught. Just as Jacob thought they'd lose the structure, Evelyn appeared at his side with more buckets, her dress soaked through, her hair plastered to her head. Together they formed a bucket line from the water trough, fighting fire with storm and sheer determination. When the last flames died, they stood panting in the rain, covered in soot and mud. The lean-to was damaged but standing. The horses were safe. "You disobeyed a direct order," Jacob said, but there was no heat in it. "You're welcome," Evelyn replied, pushing wet hair from her face. Lightning flashed again, illuminating her fierce expression, and Jacob felt something fundamental shift inside him. This wasn't the fragile Eastern girl he'd rescued. This was a woman who'd fight beside him, who'd risk herself for what mattered. "Come on," he said roughly. "We're soaked through." Back in the cabin, Jacob built up the fire while Evelyn disappeared behind the blanket he'd strung up for privacy. When she emerged, she wore one of his shirts and a pair of pants cinched tight with rope. Her wet things hung to dry. "Don't laugh," she warned, though her lips twitched. "Wouldn't dream of it." but he had to turn away to hide his smile. She looked like a child playing dress-up, yet somehow the sight of her in his clothes stirred something possessive in him. "Your turn," she said, settling by the fire.
"You're dripping everywhere."
Jacob changed quickly, acutely aware of her presence in a way he hadn't been before. When he returned, she'd made coffee and set out a bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes.
"Figured we earned it,"
she said, pouring 2 measures. They sat before the fire, steam rising from their damp hair, sharing the comfortable silence of people who'd faced danger together. The whiskey burned warm in Jacob's chest, but not as warm as the feeling growing there. "Thank you," he said finally, "for the help." "Partners help each other," Evelyn replied simply. Partners. The word lodged in Jacob's mind like a seed in fertile ground. Is that what they were becoming? "Tell me about your life before." He found himself asking, before the journey west. Evelyn tucked her feet under her, looking young and vulnerable despite her borrowed clothes. It was smaller, predictable. Father had his clock shop. Mother gave piano lessons. We lived in a brick house with real glass windows and a parlor that nobody ever used. Why leave? Father got restless after the war. Said America was bigger than our little corner of Philadelphia. When Uncle Daniel wrote about California, about orange trees and opportunity. She shrugged. Mother didn't want to go, but she loved Father too much to let him go alone. And you? I wanted adventure. Her laugh was bitter. Be careful what you wish for, right? This isn't what you expected. No. She met his eyes across the fire. But maybe it's what I needed. Back home, my life was planned out: marry Charles Worthington, have his children, host tea parties until I died of boredom. Charles Worthington? Son of Father's business partner. Nice enough, I suppose. Soft hands and perfect manners and about as much backbone as overcooked pasta. She took another sip of whiskey. He wrote poetry, bad poetry. Worse than Shakespeare? Much worse. Lots of rhyming dove with love and comparing my eyes to various celestial bodies. She grinned. Mother said I was too particular, but I wanted... What? More, she said simply. I wanted to matter, to be more than just someone's ornament. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm moving on. Jacob watched the firelight play across her features, understanding more than she probably realized. Margaret had been like that too, seeking something beyond the conventional life laid out for her. You matter, he said quietly. Evelyn looked up, surprised. Do I? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Jacob knew he stood at a crossroads. He could deflect, maintain the safe distance he'd cultivated, or he could tell the truth. Yes, he said simply. You do. Her eyes filled with tears, she quickly blinked away. You barely know me. I know enough. Jacob leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I know you're brave. You didn't have to help with the fire. I know you're strong. You've survived losses that would break most people. I know you're kind. I've seen you with the horses. Gentle, even when you're afraid. Jacob. And I know I look forward to morning coffee more than I have in 3 years, just because you'll be across the table. The admission surprised him as much as her. Evelyn set down her cup with trembling hands. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Not yet. Jacob stood, suddenly needing distance. It's late. We should sleep. But as he settled into his chair, Evelyn spoke from the bed. Jacob, I look forward to morning coffee too. He smiled in the darkness, feeling both terrified and alive in a way he'd forgotten was possible. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and full of promise. Inside, something new was beginning to grow between them, fragile as spring grass, but just as determined. For the first time in 3 years, Jacob Callahan fell asleep thinking of the future instead of the past, and in her borrowed clothes, safe in his bed. Evelyn Rose dreamed not of what she'd lost, but of what she might find. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sutton was still out there. The ranch still needed tending. And the question of Evelyn's future remained unresolved. But tonight, with the storm past and the horses safe, two lonely souls had found something unexpected in each other. Partnership, friendship, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something more. "Darlin'," Jacob whispered to the dying fire, testing the endearment he'd been fighting for days. It felt right on his tongue, natural as breathing. From the bed came a soft sigh, as if Evelyn had heard and approved. And in that moment, the cabin that had been his refuge from the world became something else entirely, a shelter for two hearts learning to beat again, despite all the reasons they shouldn't. The morning sky hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of more storms. Jacob saddled Rex while Evelyn packed supplies, their movements efficient after weeks of shared routine. They were heading to the eastern boundary to check fence lines, normally a solo job. But Jacob had grown unwilling to leave her alone for long periods. "Riders coming," Evelyn said suddenly, shading her eyes against the pale sun that broke through the clouds. Jacob's hand moved instinctively to his Colt. 3 riders, moving with the lazy confidence of men who owned the ground they covered. As they drew closer, his tension eased slightly. Cowboys from the Double C, led by his foreman, Tom Martinez. "Boss," Tom called, touching his hat brim. His weathered face showed surprise at seeing Evelyn. "Didn't expect to find you out this way." "Checking the eastern sections," Jacob replied evenly. "What brings you boys out?" "Trouble, I'm afraid." Tom's expression darkened. "That Sutton gang hit the Miller place 2 days ago. Burned them out. Killed old Sam and his boy." Evelyn gasped softly. Jacob moved closer to her, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by his men. "They're getting bolder," Tom continued. "Sheriff's forming a posse. Wants to know if you'll ride with them." "When?" "Tomorrow dawn. Meeting at Sweetwater Creek." Jacob felt Evelyn tense beside him. The smart thing would be to join the posse, to help eliminate the threat Sutton posed. But that would mean leaving Evelyn alone. And something in his gut warned against it. "I'll think on it," he said finally. "Any other news?" Tom's eyes flicked to Evelyn again. "Town's full of talk about a survivor from that wagon train massacre. Some folks saying there's a woman hiding out here at the Double C." "Folks say a lot of things," Jacob replied coolly. "Yes, sir, they do." Tom's tone was carefully neutral. "Also heard Sutton's been asking around about that same survivor, offering good money for information." The implications hung heavy in the air. Jacob felt Evelyn's hand grip his arm, though she kept her face composed. "Appreciate the warning. Tom, tell the boys to stay sharp." After the cowboys left, Jacob and Evelyn continued their ride in silence. The landscape seemed more threatening now, every shadow potentially hiding danger. "You should join the posse," Evelyn said finally. "It's the right thing to do." "Is it? Those men need to be stopped. How many more families will die if "And what happens to you while I'm gone?" Jacob interrupted. "You think Sutton won't come looking here?" "I can take care of myself. You've taught me. A few weeks of shooting lessons don't make you ready for men like that." His voice came out harsher than intended. "They're killers. Evelyn, professional ones." She reined in her horse, forcing him to stop. "So what do we do, hide forever? Let them terrorize the territory because you're afraid to leave me alone?" "I'm not afraid," Jacob bit off the words, recognizing the lie. He was afraid, terrified of losing her the way he'd lost Margaret, of failing to protect another woman he'd come to care for. "Yes, you are," Evelyn said softly. "And so am I. But we can't live in fear. Jacob, that's not living at all." Before he could respond, Rex's ears pricked forward, and the horse snorted nervously. Jacob's instincts screamed danger. He reached for Evelyn's reins, But the shots came too fast, the sharp crack of rifles from multiple directions. "Ride!" Jacob shouted, wheeling Rex around as bullets whined past. They spurred their horses into a gallop, racing across the open ground toward a cluster of rocks that offered cover. More shots followed, kicking up dirt at their horses' hooves. Jacob counted at least 4 shooters, positioned to cut off their escape routes. They made it to the rocks just as Evelyn's horse screamed and stumbled. She kicked free of the stirrups as the animal went down, and Jacob hauled her up behind him on Rex. They dove behind the largest boulder as bullets chipped stone above their heads. "You hit," Jacob demanded, checking her for blood.
No, poor Buttercup.
She was shaking but alert, already reaching for the rifle Jacob had insisted she carry. "Save your ammunition," he advised, assessing their position. "Make every shot count." The firing stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. Then a voice called out, "Smooth," educated, with an undertone of amusement that made Jacob's skin crawl. "Well now, this is convenient. Jacob Callahan and the mysterious survivor, both in one spot. Must be my lucky day." Sutton. Jacob had never heard his voice, but he knew it had to be him. "What do you want, Sutton?" Jacob called back. Direct and to the point. I like that in a man. Sutton's laugh carried on the wind. "What I want is simple, the girl. Hand her over, and you can ride away. This isn't your fight, Callahan." "Like hell." Jacob muttered. "Louder," he said. "Can't do that." "No pity. Do you even know why I want her?" Evelyn pressed closer to Jacob, her breath quick against his neck.
"The mining claim," she whispered. "It must be about Father's papers."
"Smart girl," Sutton called, as if he'd heard. Her daddy was carrying the deed to the richest silver strike in the territory, already assayed and certified, worth enough to make us all kings.
"I don't know anything about that,"
Evelyn shouted, surprising Jacob with her courage. "Father never said—"
Now. Miss Rose, your brother told a different story before he died. Said your daddy sewed those papers into your corset for safekeeping. Said you were the only one who knew exactly where."
Jacob felt Evelyn stiffen. It was true. Then, she'd been carrying a fortune all this time and hadn't trusted him enough to mention it.
"Even if that were true,"
Jacob called, buying time while he planned.
"what makes you think she still has them?"
"Because she's smart enough to know they're her only insurance, her only bargaining chip." Sutton's voice hardened. "Here's my offer. She comes out now, gives me those papers, and I'll make it quick for both of you. Otherwise, we'll wait you out, and when we take you, which we will, things will go much harder." "Counter-offer!" Jacob shouted. "You and your men ride off now, and I don't hunt down every last one of you like the dogs you are." The answer came as renewed gunfire, forcing them to hunker down. Jacob counted shots, memorizing positions. 4 men, maybe 5. Bad odds, but he'd faced worse.
"I'm sorry,"
Evelyn said during a lull, her voice thick with unshed tears.
"I should have told you about the papers. I didn't know who to trust." "Do you trust me now?"
"Yes," no hesitation. "Then follow my lead." Jacob studied the terrain, formulating a desperate plan. "When I give the word, you run for that gulch to the left. Keep low. Don't stop. There's a cave about 50 yards up Margaret, and I used to picnic there. Hide inside and don't come out until I call for you. What about you?" "I'll keep them busy." "Jacob, no. We stay together." He turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his hands.
"Listen to me, darling. I've already lost one woman I cared about. I won't lose another, not while I have breath in my body."
Tears spilled down her cheeks.
"I can't leave you."
"You can and you will." His thumb brushed away her tears.
"Trust me. Evelyn, please."
She kissed him then, sudden and desperate, tasting of fear and promise. When they broke apart, her green eyes blazed with determination. "You better come back to me, Jacob Callahan. Count on it." He pressed his spare pistol into her hands. On three. 1, 2. On three. Jacob rose up, firing, drawing return fire while Evelyn sprinted for the gulch. He saw her make it to cover and allowed himself a moment's relief before focusing on the fight. The battle was fierce and brutal. Jacob used every trick learned in years of frontier survival, moving between rocks, making each shot count. He took down 2 of Sutton's men before a bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him back. Getting tired, Callahan, Sutton taunted. My boys can do this all day. But then Jacob herded horses approaching fast. Tom Martinez and the Double C Cowboys, drawn by the gunfire. The odds suddenly shifted. Sutton must have heard them too. This isn't over. Callahan, that girl and those papers are mine. The outlaws fled under covering fire, vanishing into the broken country like smoke. Tom and his men gave chase, but Jacob knew they'd escape. Men like Sutton always had bolt holes planned. Boss, you're hit, Tom said, returning to find Jacob slumped against a rock.
Just a graze. The girl, she's in the cave.
But Evelyn was already running toward them, her face white with fear. She fell to her knees beside Jacob, her hands gentle but sure as she examined his wound.
You damn fool,
she said, her voice breaking.
You beautiful, stupid, brave fool.
Such language, Jacob managed, trying for humor despite the pain. What would your mother say?
She'd say I found myself a man worth cursing for.
Evelyn tore strips from her petticoat to bind his shoulder.
Don't ever scare me like that again.
Tom cleared his throat.
Hate to interrupt, but we need to get you both back to the ranch. Sutton will regroup.
Come back with more men. As they helped Jacob mount Rex, Evelyn pressed against his good side, her arm around his waist.
The papers,
she said quietly.
They're real. Father sewed them into my corset like James said. I'm sorry I didn't tell you.
We'll deal with it later, Jacob said, suddenly exhausted. Right now, let's just get home. Home. The word slipped out naturally, encompassing not just the place but the woman beside him. Whatever happened next with Sutton, with the silver claim, with the growing feelings between them, they'd face it together. The storm that had threatened all morning finally broke as they rode toward the ranch, washing the blood from the ground and the gun smoke from the air. But Jacob barely noticed the rain. He was too focused on the woman who rode beside him, who'd kissed him like he was worth saving, who'd trusted him with her life and her secrets. Sutton was still out there, more dangerous than ever now that his prize was confirmed. The fight was far from over, but for now, Jacob had what mattered most: Evelyn safe beside him, his men loyal around him, and the knowledge that he'd found something worth fighting for again.
Jacob,
Evelyn said softly as the ranch buildings came into view.
Yeah, darlin'.
When this is over, when Sutton's dealt with and the dangers past, what then? He considered the question, thinking of all the reasons he should send her away, all the walls he'd built around his heart. Then he looked down at her rain-soaked face, saw the hope and fear mingled in her eyes, and knew there was only one answer that mattered. Then we start living, he said simply. Together, if you'll have me. Her smile was like sunrise after the storm. I thought you'd never ask. The fever came on fast, turning Jacob's skin burning hot beneath Evelyn's worried hands. What had started as a simple graze had become infected, the wound angry and red despite her careful cleaning. For 3 days and nights, she barely left his side in the main ranch house, ignoring the shocked whispers of the cowboys who'd never seen their boss so vulnerable. His temperature's rising again, Tom Martinez said, bringing fresh water and clean cloths. The foreman's weathered face showed deep concern. Maybe we should fetch Doc Harrison from town.
The doctor's a day's ride away,
Evelyn replied, wringing out a cloth to place on Jacob's burning forehead.
He could be.
She couldn't finish the thought. Jacob tossed restlessly, lost in fever dreams. Sometimes he called for Margaret, which cut Evelyn deep. Other times he reached for her, mumbling her name like a prayer. She held his hand through it all, whispering encouragements, promises, pleas to any god who might be listening. On the third night, desperation drove her to try something she'd only heard about from an old native woman her mother had befriended on the trail, sending Tom for specific herbs, willow bark, echinacea, and sage. She prepared a bitter tea, praying she remembered the proportions correctly. "Come on, Jacob," she coaxed, lifting his head to dribble the medicine between his lips. "Fight this. You promised you'd come back to me. You can't break that promise now." Through that endless night, she bathed his fever-hot skin, forced medicine down his throat, and talked to keep herself sane. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about the first time she'd seen the ocean, about her dreams of a life bigger than parlor rooms and calling cards. "I used to think adventure meant going somewhere exotic," she confessed, smoothing his sweat-damp hair. "But real adventure is this building something with someone, facing whatever comes together. I want that adventure with you, Jacob Callahan. So you have to get better. You have to—" Near dawn, exhausted beyond measure, Evelyn dozed with her head on the bed beside him. She woke to a gentle touch on her hair and found Jacob watching her with clear eyes for the first time in days. "Hey there, darlin'," he whispered, his voice rough but coherent. The relief hit her like a physical blow. She burst into tears, burying her face against his chest, feeling his weak arms come around her. "Shh," he soothed, though he was the one who'd nearly died. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." "You stupid, stubborn man," she sobbed. "I thought I'd lost you." "Take more than a scratch to kill me," he said, attempting humor. "Though I feel like I've been trampled by a herd of longhorns." Tom appeared in the doorway, his face splitting into a rare grin. "Good to see you back with us, boss. Had us worried there for a spell." "Tom," Jacob said, his arms still around Evelyn. "Double the watch. Sutton's still out there." "Already done. Boys are taking shifts. Nobody's getting near this place without us knowing?" After Tom left, Jacob studied Evelyn's exhausted face. "You look terrible." Flatterer, but she smiled through her tears. "You weren't exactly at your best either, calling out for—" She stopped, not wanting to mention Margaret. "For you," Jacob finished. "Tom told me. Said you haven't left this room in 3 days. Said you turned into a regular field nurse. I couldn't lose you." The simple truth of it hung between them. "Not when we just found each other." Jacob pulled her up onto the bed beside him, ignoring her protests about propriety. "The hands have already seen you playing nurse. Don't think your reputation can get much worse." "I don't care about my reputation." She settled against his good shoulder, careful of his wound. "I care about you." They lay in comfortable silence as morning light filled the room. Finally, Jacob spoke. "The papers. We need to talk about what to do with them." Evelyn tensed. "They're yours by right. This is your land, your protection." "Our land," Jacob corrected. "Our protection. But that's not what I mean. That claim could make us wealthy beyond imagining. It could also get us killed." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm thinking we use it as bait. Draw Sutton out on our terms." Evelyn sat up to look at him. "You're in no condition to fight anyone. Not today, but I heal fast, and we can't keep living like this waiting for the next attack. Better to end it decisive." "How?" Jacob outlined a plan that was equal parts brilliant and dangerous. They'd let word slip about moving the papers to the bank in town, create an opportunity too good for Sutton to resist, with a sheriff and a posse ready. "Too many things could go wrong," Evelyn protested. "Everything could go wrong doing nothing too." Jacob caught her hand. "I won't have you living in fear, always looking over your shoulder. We deal with this, then we build our life." "Our life," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "Evelyn," Jacob's expression grew serious. There's something else. Something I should have said before. A commotion outside interrupted him. Shouts. Running feet. Tom's voice raised in warning. Evelyn grabbed the rifle kept by the bed as footsteps thundered up the stairs. "Boss," one of the younger cowboys, Billy, burst through the door. "Riders coming, lots of them. But it ain't Sutton, it's a bunch of folks from town, and they don't look happy." Jacob tried to rise, but Evelyn pushed him back. "You're staying put. Tom and I will handle this." "Like hell." "Jacob Callahan, you will stay in that bed, or so help me, I'll tie you to it." Despite the tension, Jacob's lips quirked. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn followed Tom downstairs and out onto the porch, where indeed a group of townspeople had gathered. She recognized several faces: the banker Mr. Hutchins, Mrs. Abernathy, who ran the boarding house, Reverend Cole, and others. Their expressions ranged from disapproving to openly hostile. "Where's Callahan?" Hutchins demanded. "Recovering from wounds taken defending this ranch," Tom answered coldly. "State your business." "Mrs." Abernathy stepped forward, her pinched face radiating righteous indignation. "Our business is with her." She pointed at Evelyn. "This woman has brought nothing but trouble since she arrived. The miller's dead, Cowboy's shot, and now we hear Sutton's gang is planning something bigger. All because of her." "That's not," Evelyn started, but Tom cut her off with a gesture. "Miss Rose is under the protection of this ranch," he stated. "Anyone who has a problem with that has a problem with the double C." "Protection, Mrs." Abernathy sneered. "Is that what they're calling it now? An unmarried woman living with a man, flaunting decency?" "Enough." Jacob's voice carried from the doorway. He stood there in pants and an unbuttoned shirt, leaning heavily on the frame but radiating authority. "Anyone questioning Miss Rose's honor questions mine." "Jacob, you shouldn't be up," Evelyn said, moving to support him. He put his arm around her shoulders. "As much for balance as possession. These folks came all this way. Least I can do is hear them out." Hutchins cleared his throat. "It's not about propriety. Callahan, it's about safety. Sutton wants something this woman has. Every day she stays here puts the whole territory at risk. We think, that is, the town council thinks she should leave. Go somewhere else. Let Sutton follow her away from decent folks." "You want me to throw her to the wolves to save your own hides?" Jacob translated bluntly. "We want what's best for everyone." Reverend Cole interjected, though he looked uncomfortable. "Surely you can see—" "What I see," Jacob interrupted, "is a bunch of cowards willing to sacrifice an innocent woman rather than stand up to outlaws." His gray eyes swept the crowd. "You think Sutton will stop with her? You think he won't come for your banks, your businesses, your families, once he's had a taste of blood?" "That's speculation," Hutchins protested. "It's fact. Ask the folks in Amarillo. In Fort Worth, Sutton's gang doesn't just take what they're after, they burn everything else for sport." Jacob straightened, despite the obvious pain it caused. "Now you can run scared. Hope the wolf passes by your door. Or you can stand together. Face him down like men and women with backbone." "Easy for you to say," someone called out. "You've got cowboys, guns, fortifications." "All of which I'll share with anyone willing to fight," Jacob countered. "My men will train yours. My walls will shelter your families if needed. But I won't. I will not turn away someone under my protection to save my own skin." "Even if that someone is more to you than just a guest, Mrs.?" Abernathy's tone dripped insinuation. Jacob's arm tightened around Evelyn. "Especially then." A murmur ran through the crowd. Evelyn felt the shift in atmosphere from hostile to uncertain, maybe even slightly ashamed. "What do you propose?" Reverend Cole asked finally. "We make a stand." Jacob said simply, "Together. Sutton thinks we're weak, divided. Let's show him different." It took another hour of discussion, but eventually, a plan emerged. The town would support Jacob's trap for Sutton, provide men for the posse, shelter for families if fighting spread. In return, Jacob would share intelligence and resources. As the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Abernathy lingered. You should marry that girl proper, Callahan. Give her respectability along with your protection. After she left, Evelyn helped Jacob back to bed, scolding him the entire way. You shouldn't have come down. You've probably set your recovery back days. Evelyn? And reopened the wound. Look, you're bleeding through the bandage. Evelyn. All for a bunch of small-minded gossips who... He kissed her, effectively ending her tirade. When they parted, she was breathless and pink-cheeked. Marry me, he said simply. Evelyn stared at him. What? Not for respectability or to appease the town gossips. Marry me because I love you. Because I can't imagine facing another day without you beside me. Because you've brought light back into my life when I thought I'd live in darkness forever. Jacob! Tears filled her eyes. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other weeks. But I've lived long enough to recognize what's real when I find it. He cupped her face gently. What we have is real, Evelyn. At least for me. For me, too, she whispered. I love you, Jacob. I think I have since that night you held me through the wolf howls and called me darlin' for the first time. So you'll marry me even knowing Sutton's still out there. That danger's coming. Especially knowing that. She kissed him softly. I want to face whatever comes as your wife, if you'll have me. If I'll have you, Jacob laughed, then winced as it pulled his wound. Darlin', I'd marry you right now if the Reverend hadn't already left. Then rest, Evelyn ordered, pushing him back against the pillows. Get better, because I want you standing on your own 2 feet when we say our vows. As she changed his bandage with gentle hands, Jacob watched her with wonder. This woman who'd stumbled into his life half dead had become his reason for living. The future stretched before them. Uncertain and dangerous, but no longer empty. I love you, he said again, just because he could. Evelyn smiled, and it was like sunrise over the prairie. I love you too. Now sleep. We have a wedding to plan and a villain to catch. You'll need your strength for both. Jacob closed his eyes, feeling peace despite the pain. Outside, storm clouds gathered again, but inside, love had found a way to bloom. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The town of Sweetwater Creek buzzed with activity as Jacob and Evelyn rode down Main Street, flanked by Tom Martinez and 2 other cowboys. It had been a week since Jacob's fever broke, and though he still moved carefully, his strength had returned enough to put their plan in motion. Remember, Jacob murmured to Evelyn as they dismounted at the bank. We need to be visible. Let people see us going in with the papers. Evelyn patted the leather satchel at her side, empty except for some blank documents. But nobody needed to know that. The real papers remained sewn into her corset, a secret known only to them. Inside the bank, Mr. Hutchins greeted them with nervous enthusiasm. Mr. Callahan, Miss Rose, everything is prepared as you requested. The, special deposit box in our vault. They made a show of the transaction, speaking just loud enough for the other customers to overhear. Word would spread like wildfire. The valuable mining claim documents were now in the bank's vault, scheduled to be transferred to the territorial capital next week. Thank you for your discretion, Mr. Hutchins, Jacob said formally, shaking the banker's hand. As they exited the bank, Evelyn noticed several familiar faces trying not to stare. Mrs. Abernathy whispered furiously to her companion, while Billy from the mercantile suddenly found the window display fascinating. Hooks baited, Tom observed quietly. Now we wait. But their plan hit an unexpected snag at the next stop. Reverend Cole met them at the church door, his usually kind face creased with concern. I'm afraid there's a problem, he said, ushering them into his study. Mrs. Abernathy and several other ladies have expressed strong objections to my performing your marriage ceremony. On what grounds? Jacob's voice carried a dangerous edge. The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. They claim Miss Rose's reputation is too tarnished, living unmarried at your ranch, the violence that's followed her arrival. They're threatening to leave the congregation if I proceed. Evelyn felt her cheeks burn. I see. Now, I personally don't agree. Reverend Cole hastened to add, but I must consider the unity of my flock. Your flock, Jacob interrupted, standing abruptly, can go straight to... Jacob! Evelyn placed a calming hand on his arm. It's all right. We don't need their approval. The hell we don't. You deserve a proper wedding, not to be treated like a fallen woman. Evelyn's chin lifted with quiet pride. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's all that matters. They left the church in tense silence. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. Evelyn felt their stares like physical weight. Miss Rose, a small voice piped up. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, broke free from her mother's grip and ran to Evelyn. Are you really going to marry Mr. Callahan? Annie, come back here, the mother called, but the child ignored her. Evelyn knelt to the girl's level. Yes, I am. Do you know Mr. Callahan? Annie nodded solemnly. He saved my papa's ranch when the drought came. Mama says he's a good man, even if he is grumpy. Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. He is a good man, the very best. Then why won't Reverend Cole marry you? Annie, the mother Mrs. Patterson, Evelyn realized, hurried over. I'm so sorry, Miss Rose. She doesn't understand. It's quite all right. Evelyn stood, meeting Mrs. Patterson's embarrassed gaze. Children often see more clearly than adults. Something shifted in the woman's expression. You know, my sister married a judge over in Coyote Falls. Judge McKenna. He's fair-minded, doesn't hold with gossip. Martha Patterson, Mrs. Abernathy's sharp voice cut through the moment. What are you doing? Mrs. Patterson straightened her spine. The Christian thing, prudence, something you might try sometime. She turned back to Evelyn. Judge McKenna holds court on Saturdays. It's not a church wedding, but it's legal and proper. Thank you, Evelyn said softly. That's very kind. As they walked back to the hotel where they'd taken rooms for appearance's sake, Jacob's jaw remained tight with anger. Hypocrites, all of them, taking my money, my protection, but judging you. It doesn't matter, Evelyn insisted. It does matter. Jacob stopped walking, turning to face her. You've done nothing wrong. You're brave and strong and good, and they should see that. Jacob, she touched his face gently. I don't need their approval. I only need yours. He pulled her close. Right there on Main Street, not caring who saw. You have it, always. A throat cleared behind them. Sheriff Watson approached, his star glinting in the afternoon sun. Callahan, Miss Rose, thought you should know we've had word from our scouts. Suspicious activity north of town. Could be Sutton's men, watching the bank. Jacob nodded grimly. How many? Hard to say. At least 6, maybe more. They're being careful, but not careful enough. The sheriff's weathered face showed determination. My deputies are ready. Your men. In position, Tom confirmed. Billy and the boys are watching the back trails. Then we wait. The sheriff said, My guess is they'll hit the bank tomorrow night, during the social. Most of the town will be distracted. The social Sweetwater Creek's monthly dance, one of the few entertainments in the frontier town. It would provide perfect cover for a robbery. We'll be ready, Jacob promised. That evening, in the hotel's small dining room, Evelyn picked at her dinner while Jacob reviewed plans with Tom. She felt the weight of the real documents against her ribs. Wondered if they were worth all this trouble and bloodshed. Second thoughts, Jacob asked quietly, noticing her distraction. About marrying you never, about everything else. She sighed. Those papers could make us wealthy. Yes, but they're also a curse. Maybe we should just burn them. We could, Jacob agreed. But Sutton doesn't know they're real. He'd still come after you, thinking you have them. Better to end this on our terms. And after, when Sutton's dealt with, Jacob took her hand across the table. Then we decide together. Use the claim or sell it or donate it to the church that wouldn't marry us. His thumb stroked her knuckles. I don't care about being rich. Evelyn, I care about being with you. In that case, she said with a small smile, we're already wealthy. Later, alone in her hotel room, propriety maintained for one more night, Evelyn stood at the window watching the street below. Somewhere out there, Sutton's men were preparing to strike. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt oddly calm. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It's me. Jacob's voice came through the door. She let him in, noting how he checked the hallway first. You shouldn't be here, Mrs. Abernathy probably has spies. Let her spy, Jacob said, but he left the door slightly ajar for propriety. I needed to see you. Tomorrow we spring the trap, Evelyn finished. And the day after, we get married, Judge McKenna willing. He'll be willing, Jacob said with quiet confidence. Tom's riding out at dawn to make sure of it. They stood close, but not touching, the promise of their future hanging between them like morning mist. I should tell you, Evelyn said suddenly, about the claim, where it really is. In case something happens, nothing's going to happen. Jacob, please, let me do this. She waited until he nodded. It's not just the deed that's valuable. Father had maps, geological surveys, proof of the assay. It's all sewn into the lining of my corset. He was paranoid about thieves, made me promise to keep it hidden until we reached California. And now I'm giving it to you. Tomorrow morning, before we set the trap. I don't want to carry this burden anymore. Jacob studied her face in the lamplight. You trust me that much? With my life, she said simply, with everything. He crossed the small distance between them, pulling her into his arms. I love you, he whispered against her hair. Whatever tomorrow brings, remember that. I will. And Jacob, she pulled back to look at him. When this is over, let's go back to the cabin, just for a while. I miss our simple life there. The cabin it is, he promised. We'll honeymoon where it all began. A door slammed down the hall, making them spring apart. Jacob moved to the doorway, his hand instinctively checking his gun. I should go, he said reluctantly. Big day tomorrow. You need rest. So do you. She caught his hand as he passed. Be careful tomorrow. I've just found you. I can't lose you. You won't, he promised, pressing a kiss to her palm. We've come too far to fail now. After he left, Evelyn prepared for bed with mechanical movements, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. Tomorrow they'd face Sutton, end this threat once and for all. And then they'd start the life they'd promised each other. Not the life she'd imagined as a girl in Philadelphia, full of tea parties and social calls, but something better, a life chosen freely, built on trust and love and shared courage. Outside her window, the town settled into sleep, but Evelyn lay wakeful, her hand pressed to the hidden documents that had cost so much already. Tomorrow would bring resolution, one way or another. Give me strength, she whispered to the darkness, not sure if she was praying to God or Margaret or her own lost family. Help us end this well. The wind answered with a low moan, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled wild and free and unafraid. Evelyn took it as a sign. Tomorrow, they'd face their enemies. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged in a frontier town. In love with a good man, ready to fight for their future. Whatever came next, she was ready. The social was in full swing when the first shots rang out. Fiddle music screeched to a halt as dancers froze mid-step, the festive atmosphere shattering like glass. Jacob, positioned near the bank with Tom and 3 deputies, heard the gunfire from the north, the diversion they'd expected. "That's our cue," Sheriff Watson said grimly. "They're hitting the bank from the back while their partners draw attention up front." Jacob checked his Colt one final time. Evelyn was safe at the hotel with 2 of his best men guarding her, or so he'd ordered. Something in his gut told him she wouldn't stay put, but he pushed the worry aside. The trap was sprung. Now they had to close it. They moved silently through the shadows behind the buildings, avoiding the main street where panicked townsfolk ran for cover. The bank's rear entrance showed signs of forced entry. The door hung askew, its lock shattered. "Remember," Jacob whispered, "we want Sutton alive if possible. Dead men can't tell us who else is involved." They slipped inside, guns drawn. The bank's interior was dark, except for a single lantern's glow from the vault area. Voices carried in the stillness cursing, metal on metal, the distinctive sound of dynamite being prepared. "Hurry up with that charge," a smooth voice commanded. "We've got 5 minutes before the whole town comes down on us." "Sutton." Jacob recognized the cultured tones from their standoff at the rocks. He held up 3 fingers to his companions, then 2, then 1. They burst into the vault room with coordinated precision. "Drop your weapons." The outlaws spun, caught red-handed with dynamite and tools. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Sutton smiled, a cold expression that never touched his pale eyes. "Callahan, I should have known." He raised his hands slowly, but Jacob caught the slight shift of his weight, the telltale sign of a hidden gun. "Don't even think about it," Jacob warned. "Oh, but I always think, Mr. Callahan, it's what separates us from the animals." Sutton's smile widened. "For instance, I thought you might try something like this, which is why—" A scream echoed from outside high, terrified and undeniably female. "Evelyn." Jacob's concentration wavered for just an instant, but it was enough. Sutton drew a concealed derringer, the small gun appearing like magic. The vault erupted in gunfire. Jacob dove sideways as Sutton's shot whistled past his ear. His return fire caught one of the outlaws in the shoulder, spinning him around. Tom and the deputies engaged the others in a fierce exchange, the confined space filling with smoke and noise. "The girl's mine. Callahan," Sutton shouted over the chaos. "My men have her now." Rage and fear warred in Jacob's chest. He wanted to pursue Sutton, who was backing toward a side door, but Evelyn needed him. The decision tore at him for a split second before love won over vengeance. "Tom, handle this," he shouted, already running. Outside, the scene was chaos. The diversion at the north end had drawn most of the townspeople, but a knot of figures struggled near the hotel. Jacob's blood ran cold as he recognized Evelyn fighting against 2 men trying to drag her toward waiting horses. His guards lay unconscious, or worse, on the hotel steps. Evelyn had grabbed a piece of broken fence post and was wielding it like a club, her evening dress torn and muddy. "Let me go," she snarled, swinging the makeshift weapon. One attacker cursed as she caught him across the jaw. "Hellcat Sutton said to bring her alive, but nothing." Jacob's voice cut through the night like a blade. Both men spun to find themselves staring down the barrel of his Colt. "Release her, now." 2 against 1. Callahan. The larger man sneered. "You can't get us both." "Want to bet her life on that?" Jacob's voice was deadly calm, but inside he was calculating angles, distances, odds. Evelyn made the decision for them. Using the distraction, she drove her elbow into one captor's stomach and twisted free. The man doubled over. giving Jacob a clear shot at the other. The Colt roared. The outlaw spun and fell. The second man, still gasping from Evelyn's blow, reached for his gun. Evelyn swung her fence post with all her might, catching him across the temple. He dropped like a stone. "Behind you!" Evelyn screamed. Jacob whirled to find Sutton emerging from the shadows. His derringer raised. Time slowed to honey. Jacob knew he couldn't turn fast enough. Knew the angle was wrong. Knew. Evelyn moved like lightning, throwing herself between them just as Sutton fired. She cried out, clutching her side as she fell. "No!" The word tore from Jacob's throat as his gun swung toward Sutton. But the outlaw was already running, vanishing into the maze of buildings as more shots erupted from the bank. Jacob dropped to his knees beside Evelyn, his hands shaking as he examined her wound. Blood seeped between her fingers, but she was conscious, her green eyes bright with pain and determination. "Just a graze," she gasped. "Go after him! Don't let him escape!" "I'm not leaving you." Jacob tore strips from his shirt to press against the wound. "Never again." Sheriff Watson appeared, breathless and bloodied. "We got 4 of them. 2 dead, 2 captured. But Sutton went that way." Evelyn pointed weakly. "Please, end this." Jacob looked between the woman he loved and the direction of his enemy's flight. The choice that had been so hard in the bank was suddenly crystal clear. "Sheriff, get her to Doc Harrison. Tom." His foreman emerged from the bank, reloading his rifle. "You and Billy. With me. We're ending this tonight."
"Jacob?"
Evelyn caught his hand.
"I love you. Come back to me."
"Always," he promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Always." The hunt led through the darkened town and out into the wasteland beyond. Sutton had horses stashed, of course he did, but so did Jacob's men. Under the rising moon, they thundered across the landscape, following fresh tracks and the occasional glimpse of their quarry. "He's heading for Devil's Canyon," Tom shouted over the wind. "Probably has a hideout there." Devil's Canyon, a maze of box canyons and dead ends where a man could lose himself or make a final stand. Jacob spurred Rex harder, determined not to let Sutton escape to fight another day. They caught up at the canyon's mouth. Sutton's horse had thrown a shoe, forcing him to dismount. He crouched behind a cluster of rocks, rifle in hand, as Jacob and his men took cover. "Give it up! Sutton!" Jacob called. "Your men are dead or captured. It's over." "Nothing's over until I say it is," Sutton replied. His cultured voice had lost its smooth edge, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "You think you've won. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. Callahan."
"Enlighten me."
"That claim, it's worth more than just silver. There are men in Washington, powerful men, who need that land for their railroad schemes. They hired me to clear the path." Sutton laughed bitterly. "But I got greedy. Figured I'd take the silver, too. Now they'll send someone else, someone worse." "Let them come," Jacob said. "We'll be ready. You think love will protect you. I had love once." Sutton's voice cracked. "The war took her, took everything, left me with nothing but hate and hunger." "You chose that path," Jacob replied. "Nobody forced you to become a killer." "Didn't they?" Sutton stood suddenly, rifle raised. "The world makes monsters. Callahan, remember that when they come for your woman." The final exchange was brief and brutal. Sutton fired first, his shot chipping stone near Jacob's head. Jacob's return fire was more accurate. Sutton staggered, dropped his rifle, and fell to his knees. Jacob approached cautiously, gun ready. But the fight had gone out of his enemy. Sutton pressed a hand to his chest, where blood spread dark in the moonlight. "Funny," he wheezed. "I can't remember her face anymore. The woman I loved, just the pain of losing her." "It doesn't have to end like that," Jacob said quietly. Sutton's laugh became a cough. "Too late for me, but you've got something worth saving. Don't let them take it. His pale eyes fixed on something beyond Jacob's shoulder. Tell her she's got spine. Not many would take a bullet. The outlaw's words trailed into silence. His body slumped forward, and Jake Sutton breathed his last under the cold stars of Texas. What do you think he meant? Billy asked nervously. About men from Washington. Trouble for another day, Tom said firmly. Right now, we need to get back Miss Evelyn. Jacob was already mounting Rex. The ride back to town seemed endless, fear gnawing at him with every hoofbeat. Sutton was dead. The immediate threat ended. But at what cost? He found Evelyn at Doc Harrison's, pale but alert, a proper bandage around her middle. The doctor, a grizzled veteran of frontier medicine, gave Jacob a reassuring nod. Clean through the side. Missed anything vital. She'll have a scar, but she'll heal fine. Jacob collapsed into the chair beside her bed, taking her hand in both of his. You brilliant, reckless woman. What were you thinking? I was thinking, she said weakly, that I'd rather take a bullet than watch you take one. That's my job, protecting you? No. Her green eyes sparked with familiar fire. That's our job. Protecting each other, partners. Remember? Despite everything, Jacob smiled. Partners. Is he? Dead. It's over. Evelyn. That part. Anyway. She squeezed his hand. What did he say at the end? Jacob told her about Sutton's warnings, his mention of powerful men and railroad schemes. Evelyn listened quietly, then sighed. The papers. We should destroy them, if they're going to bring more trouble. We'll decide together. Jacob interrupted. Later. Right now. You need rest. Stay with me. Try to make me leave. As dawn broke over Sweetwater Creek, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Jacob kept vigil beside Evelyn's bed. The night had tested them with violence and fear, but they'd survived. More than survived, they'd proven something to the town, to their enemies, and most importantly, to each other. Jacob, Evelyn murmured, half asleep from the laudanum Doc Harrison had administered. Right here, darlin'. We still getting married tomorrow? He kissed her knuckles gently. Soon as you can stand, Judge McKenna's already agreed. Good. She smiled drowsily. Want to be your wife? Officially. And I want to be your husband. Jacob replied, officially in every other way. Outside, the town began to wake. There would be questions, statements to give, bodies to bury. The threat Sutton had hinted at would need investigating. But for now, in this quiet moment, Jacob Callahan held the hand of the woman who'd taken a bullet for him and knew that whatever came next, they'd face it as one. Sleep now, he whispered. I'll be here when you wake. And he was. Through the long day that followed, through the pain and the healing, through all the tomorrows that stretched ahead, he was there. As promised, a rich cowboy who'd found a lost girl on the trail and discovered she was his salvation, just as he was hers. The morning dawned clear and bright, painting the Texas landscape in shades of gold and amber. 3 weeks had passed since the night at the bank, and Evelyn stood before the mirror in Mrs. Patterson's spare room, smoothing the cream-colored dress that kind woman had altered for her. You look beautiful, Mrs. Patterson said, pinning a small cluster of wildflowers in Evelyn's hair, like a proper bride. Thank you for everything, Evelyn said, emotion thick in her voice. After how the town treated me. The town was wrong. Mrs. Patterson said firmly, fear makes fools of us all sometimes, but you and Mr. Callahan showed us what real courage looks like. A knock at the door interrupted them. Miss Evelyn, Tom Martinez's voice called. Boss says to tell you Judge McKenna's ready when you are. Evelyn took a deep breath, pressing a hand to her still tender side where Sutton's bullet had grazed her. The wound had healed clean. leaving only a small scar, a permanent reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Outside, she found a surprise. Instead of the simple wagon she'd expected, a proper carriage waited, decorated with ribbons and more wildflowers. And instead of empty streets, dozens of townsfolk had gathered not in judgment this time, but in celebration. "Figured we owed you a proper send-off," Sheriff Watson said, tipping his hat. "After what you did for the town." Even Mrs. Abernathy was there, looking somewhat chastened. She approached hesitantly. "Miss Rose, I owe you an apology. I judged hastily, based on propriety rather than character. I hope you can forgive a foolish old woman."
"There's nothing to forgive,"
Evelyn said graciously.
"We're all just trying to survive out here the best we can."
The ride to Judge McKenna's office in Coyote Falls took 2 hours, but Evelyn barely noticed the time. Her thoughts were full of Jacob, of the life they were about to begin, of the future stretching before them like an open trail. Judge McKenna proved to be exactly as Mrs. Patterson had described, a fair-minded man with kind eyes and no patience for gossip. His office was simple but dignified, with law books lining the walls and a large desk that served as both workspace and altar. Jacob waited there, dressed in his finest, a black suit she'd never seen before, his boots polished to a shine, his usually unruly hair neatly combed. But it was the look in his eyes when he saw her that took her breath away, love, wonder, and a joy so profound it made her heart ache.
"You came,"
he said softly. "Did you doubt I would?"
"Never. Not for a second."
Judge McKenna cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple, without the frills and fuss of a church wedding, but the words they spoke carried weight promises of love, fidelity, partnership through whatever trials lay ahead. "Do you, Jacob Samuel Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jacob said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Evelyn Rose, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?"
"I do,"
Evelyn whispered, then louder.
"I do."
"Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife." Jacob's kiss was tender, reverent, a seal on promises made and futures intertwined. When they parted, Evelyn saw tears in his eyes. This strong, stoic man who'd faced down outlaws without flinching was crying at his own wedding. "Happy tears," he assured her, touching her face with gentle fingers. "Margaret would have liked you, would have wanted this for me. I hope I can honor her memory by loving you well." Evelyn replied. The journey back to the Double C was different from any ride they'd taken before. They sat close in the carriage, hands entwined, speaking of everything and nothing. Tom drove, giving them privacy while Billy rode ahead to prepare the surprise. "Surprise?" Evelyn asked when they turned not toward the main house, but toward the familiar trail to the mountain cabin. "Our beginning," Jacob said simply. "Seemed right to return there." The cabin had been transformed. The Cowboys had spent days cleaning and preparing it, fresh curtains at the windows, new blankets on the bed, wildflowers in mason jars on every surface. A feast waited on the table, and someone had even managed to procure a small cake from town. "It's perfect," Evelyn breathed. "The boys wanted to do something special," Jacob explained. "This cabin means something to them too. It's where their boss found his heart again." They shared their wedding meal as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Afterward, they sat on the porch Jacob had built during her recovery, watching the stars emerge one by one. "I have something for you," Evelyn said, producing a leather portfolio from her trunk. "A wedding gift." Inside were the papers, the deed, the surveys, all the documentation for the silver claim that had cost so much blood and sorrow. "I had Tom take me to the land office while you were working yesterday," she explained. "The claim is now in both our names. Whatever we decide to do with it, we decide together." Jacob studied the papers by lamplight. Sutton was right about one thing. This is worth a fortune. enough to make us powerful, to protect ourselves from whoever Washington sends next. Or we could sell it, use the money to build something better. Schools for the territory, hospitals, help for families traveling west. He looked at her. What do you want? Evelyn considered. I want a life with meaning. I want children who grow up knowing their parents made a difference. I want... She paused, then smiled. I want to matter. Remember, that's why I came west. Then we'll make it matter. All of it. Jacob set the papers aside and pulled her close. Starting tomorrow. We'll figure out how to use this blessing, but tonight... Tonight is ours, Evelyn finished. Later, as they lay entwined in the bed where she'd first recovered, where he'd first called her darlin', Evelyn traced the scar on Jacob's shoulder from Sutton's bullet. We've been marked by this land, she said softly. Branded, Jacob agreed, catching her hand and kissing the palm. Like the cattle, we belong here now. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day? Jacob's arms tightened around her. Don't! That path leads nowhere good. I would have died, Evelyn continued. And you would have stayed locked in your grief forever. Instead, she turned in his arms to face him. Instead, we saved each other. Is that what we did? That's exactly what we did. A rich cowboy found a virgin lost on the trail. In his cabin, he held her tight when she was afraid. And then he chose her forever. Just like she chose him. Jacob murmured against her hair. Forever and always. Outside, coyotes sang their wild songs to the moon. The wind whispered through the mesquite, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. In the morning, they would return to the main house, take up their responsibilities, begin the work of building something from the gift of the silver claim. There would be challenges. Sutton's warning about men from Washington proved prophetic, but Jacob and Evelyn faced them together. Partners in every sense. They established the Callahan Foundation, using the wealth from the silver mine to fund schools and medical clinics across the territory. They raised 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, teaching them that true wealth came not from what you owned, but from what you gave. Mrs. Abernathy became one of Evelyn's staunchest supporters, channeling her formidable energy into charitable works. Tom Martinez married Mrs. Patterson's niece and settled on a section of the Double C that Jacob gifted him. Even Billy found love with a schoolteacher drawn west by the opportunities the Callahan Foundation provided. But all that lay in the future, on this wedding night, in the cabin where their love began. Jacob and Evelyn simply held each other and marveled at the journey that had brought them together. From tragedy had come triumph. From loss had come love. From a chance meeting on a dusty trail had come a partnership that would reshape the territory. I love you, Mrs. Callahan, Jacob whispered as sleep finally claimed them. And I love you, Mr. Callahan, Evelyn replied. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for saving me right back. The lamp burned low and finally guttered out, leaving them in peaceful darkness. But the light they'd kindled together, the light of hope, of love, of lives lived with purpose, that light would burn bright for generations to come. 2 souls who'd found each other in the wilderness had created their own promised land, not in California's orange groves, but in a simple cabin in the Texas hills, where love had conquered loss and 2 hearts had learned to beat as one. The coyotes sang on, their wild chorus a celebration of life persisting despite all odds. And in the cabin on the mountain, the rich cowboy held his bride tight, having chosen her forever, just as she had chosen him. Their story had begun with tragedy and loneliness. It continued with courage and partnership. And it would end many, many years later with a legacy of love that turned the harsh frontier into a place where dreams could take root and flourish. But tonight, they were simply Jacob and Evelyn, husband and wife, safe in each other's arms as the vast Texas sky wheeled overhead, full of stars and infinite possibility. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Jacob and Evelyn's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover these frontier tales of love and adventure.